فلسطين فلسطيني. كيرستن شايد هي عالمة أنثروبولوجيا ومؤرخة في الفن، وهي مؤلفة كتاب قطع خيالية الفن والنشاط الاجتماعي من لبنان 1920 ل 1950، ولها مقالات في عدد من المجلات، منها المجلة الدولية في دراسات الشرق الأوسط ومجلة آرت ماجازينز. كيرستن هي راح تكون المحررة الأكاديمية لمشاريع تاريخ الفن، وراح تشتغل عن قرب مع الباحثين اللي راح يعرضوا مشاريعهم اللي هي قيد العمل في هاي المرحلة، وراح كمان تكون كاتبة المقدمة التحريرية لهذا الإصدار. تفضلي كيرستن.
شكرا كثير يا مرح. من سمع صوت؟ Okay, so I'm going to have to speak in English. My Arabic isn't good, even though I started studying Arabic here as a student at Birzeit 30 years ago. And I'm very honored to return. And I'm very happy that I was able to join this project, even though it was quite late. So my thanks to Adila and to and to the Palestinian Museum staff, and especially Marah and the audience that was able to come today at this time or to join via the live stream. So I want to start with a personal anecdote, but I need to be able to share my screen. Okay, so I want to start with a personal anecdote about the words that I've chosen that will be on the screen momentarily as the title of this talk. The first word is Palestinian or Falastini, and we'll talk about what that means, but I expect you'll already have some ideas. And the second word is Philistine, or Palestine, which is an English word and a German word, and a Spanish and a French and an Italian word that we'll go into in the middle of the talk. And lastly, the third term is Philistinian, and I haven't decided if it deserves a ta or a ta, but I'm not eager to get rid of the ta. So Philistinian كظرف يعني الحدث يعني مش نعت, a way of doing things. Let's see if I can share now. Yes. So now you see the words. So it was in the spring semester of my third year in college, 1991, that George H.W. Bush announced that American generals were leading a multinational force to invade Iraq. In my 2 decades then of being American, this was the first war in which I found myself implicated. And I protested it daily and publicly. I wore black to remind myself people were dying, because on news outlets, the news outlets merely reported the, quote, eerily beautiful bombs, as one anchor put it. An art history major at the time, I rankled to learn that many of my fellow students rationalized the slaughter, saying that despite Iraq's early status as the cradle of civilization, the dearth of courses on our campus about any contemporary Iraqi, Arab, or even Middle Eastern art proved that Iraq had lost its relevance. Contemporary Iraqis, quote, offered nothing important to humanity, my classmates told me, or end quote. We like to think of art as a cultural bridge, uniting humanity, but my classmates' responses revealed to me that art can classify peoples and rank them. It can even explain who merits life or death. The art historical task of memorizing styles and names took on a sinister meaning to me. Then, among fellow anti-war demonstrators, I met a handful of Palestinian dancers. A cognitive dissonance jarred me. What do you mean you are doing art now? I asked them, barely comprehending the military closure and occupation they endured at home. My astonishment that they took art seriously, despite the difficult living conditions, stemmed from having learned that art belongs to the global upper class. I realized that if I wanted to really learn about art, I should study with these dancers outside the academy. In June 1992, I joined the Arabic language program at this university. By the grace of scores and scores of artists, friends, facilitators, and exhibition goers, I started unlearning the meaning of art history and art. What I started to learn was what I call a local art history, meaning one, quote, undertaken from the vantage point of the producers and not based on the march of world historical ages of art's development, as anthropologist Fred Myers puts it. So it's not at all a Hegelian approach to art history. In such an account, there are no gaps to be filled, little nod to the title of the conference in Arabic, but rather openings for paying closer attention. To explain what I mean, I look at 3 artworks I've encountered in my research and life. So the first one is what taught me about the word Filistini. I first encountered Selma on a postcard rack in a small stationery shop on Salahuddin Street in Lodz, and I continued to run into her throughout my stay on posters, in homes, and in newspaper articles about Palestine. Originally painted by Suleiman Mansour in the early 80s, and I think this one is from 80, the picture enjoyed immense popularity a decade later and continues to do so to this day. 12, for example, one researcher in Beirut showed me on his cell phone photographs of his installation of a mosaic version of Selma in his new apartment, which, to his chagrin, was not closer to his homeland. Decorating the end of a corridor in his new house with this work would, he hoped, remind him of the ultimate destination of all his efforts. Selma features a young woman in colorful peasant dress, in a gaily decorated archway, holding a basket of oranges. The spatial composition can cause confusion. As a columnar structure, the female figure upholds the pictorial space. She is the right angle of a triangle, a form used to refer to stability and ground orientation. Or landedness. The thickness of her neck, neatness of her braids, and broadness of her hands all instantiate her inherent dispassion. She can withstand any agitation. She concretizes a political stance first officially recognized at the Baghdad Conference of 1978, sumud, steadfastness. Yet into this serene, secure space Selma creates, a jarring element arrives, a basket that literally does not occupy space. The female figure's hands appear to exist in a different plane from the basket they purport to carry. No shading carves out space between the figure and the wall for the basket to exist. The negation of space creates a suffocating unity between woman and archway. Relatedly, any observant Palestinian would notice that her dress and fruit hailed from inaccessible regions. Following the war of 1967, the former a melange from the West Bank and the latter from the Mediterranean coast, categorically forbidden to West Bank dwellers. And let me just say, these are ideas that I am developing now, and I'm very happy that I'm sharing them with you first before they go to print anywhere so that I can get many corrections and feedback. So just take notes and let me know, please. At a time when Palestinian intellectuals advocated a back-to-the-land ideology of self-sufficiency, which few viewers could fulfill, Selma inverted the Arabic proverb that the eye can see, but the hand can't reach. Al-ayn basira wal yad basira. Here, what the eye cannot see as it looks out upon the current political condition, the artist's hand can reach. Mansour's painterly hand fashions a unified, sovereign, ethnically Palestinian territory as a basis for orienting one's life. In this peculiar compression of various aspects of Palestinian agrarian society, one finds a visual corollary, not for a renewed life of farming, which would never put a woman in a mountain dress presenting coastal products, but for a rejuvenated life based on values of integrity and autonomy. But let us keep looking. The painted Selma stands stoically beneath an arch that glows like a halo behind her white veil. Her placid figuration harkens to the great humanist church artist whose work Mansour studied at Beit Zalal Art College. With his visual references to European classical tradition and the locally situated myth of martyrdom, Mansour marries ethnic particularity and canonical glory. He conflates the art of the Italian Renaissance with a local issue, and this conflation makes withstanding the Israeli occupation both Palestinian and Renaissance European, local and transcendent. It suggests that the Palestinian body can be recognized and its right to sovereignty admitted when, yani hal, fashioned in the hands of artists who can meet universal standards, as Mansour said in a 1992 interview I conducted with him. He demanded that his work be art, capital A, not part, of a larger world. يعني يشوفني كفنان مش مجرد فلسطيني. Like many established artists I met in that period, Mansour worried that such art might seem overly determined by political demands. Okay, now I'm moving to the next term, Philistine. So this is the term that has come, and I'll talk about its genealogy, but it is definitely with a ta, right? Okay. So in his 1997 mixed media work, Philistine, artist Khalil Rabah doesn't just open the Oxford Dictionary to the word which, in his Arabic mother tongue, names his national community. He nails it open, hammering around the definition until all other words are obscured and the nail tips extrude from the dictionary's covers. The angle of some of these nails suggests that Rabah hammered them twice over, suffusing this object with a charge of both anger and its release. So if you look, you'll see some nails that are kind of like this and then that, right? They have an initial pound and then another pound over them. Thus, the dictionary, thus unusable, Rabah reduces his language of learnedness to an unspeakable metal mouthful. Only this single word remains for both a member of a people opposing the Israelites in ancient Palestine and a person who is hostile or indifferent to culture. While all other words condensed in this reference volume may succumb to material circumstances, i.e. the hammering, it alone endures, perpetuating a duplex definition that denies the very possibility of Rabah and Palestinians to make art or culture. Sources suggest that German pietist students in the 1680s, having declared themselves new Israelites, denounced debt-collecting innskeepers as Der Philister, or Philistines. So we're in 1680s Jena, university town, and the Germans, these are connected to Lutheranism, believed that they had been chosen by God to be the new Israelites, and anyone who opposed their intellectual, scholarly movement was a Philistine, or Der Philister. In 1774, Goethe used the term to describe bureaucrats in his novel Werther, and with Schiller applied it to literary critics they accused of indifference or hostility to, quote, the higher interests of German poetry. For sake of time, I cannot track the vagaries of the term through Hegel, Marx, Nietzsche, Matthew Arnold, Adorno, and Bourdieu. However, I point to this amazing span of thinkers who took diametrically opposed stances on culture to underscore the stakes of pushing the Philistine out. The Philistine is the insider with the material means and physical capacities to cherish art who simply doesn't. The Philistine is, firmly among the so-called civilized, unlike barbarians or heathens who would be outside. The Philistine is the messenger and medium of art's fragmentation. At this time, you really have the consolidation of the different terms between art and craft. And so art became that which is beautiful, not useful. Art, not craft. For itself, not for politics. Free, not bound. What art actually looks like, we could forever quibble over. But what it does not look like, what not art is, the Philistine securely guards. Curiously, Unlike other art pejoratives, such as primitive, tribal, and provincial, Philistine remains available to use without political taint. Author and activist for Black America, James Baldwin, cannily quipped to white America, quote, "I'm a man, but if you think I'm an N-word, that means you need it," end quote. I venture that it is not mere coincidence that Philistine becomes an important term moving through those thinkers, right? From just a town of Jena, moving to the capital, the capitals and the French Republic, and Marx is writing about that, into England and on. I venture that it is not mere coincidence that it becomes a term with this path for demarcating cultural contents and explaining the expulsion of non-compliant anti-cultural elements just at the time of European fixation on imperialism and colonialism as the economic solution to class wars. I am very intrigued then by Ahmed Amara's presentation yesterday that showed the maps referring to Palestine, Ottoman Palestine as Philistia. So clearly people were thinking through the Bible, right? Forcing Palestine that they found into these biblical terms, and thereby making themselves new Israelites against Philistines. The Philistine has generated two outcomes for his present-day heirs. First, I would venture, and I expect some pushback here, but an impoverished art history. As with scholarship on kindred communities, Palestinian art historiography has focused on documenting the meritorious existence of an indigenous population. So encyclopedic tomes explain Palestinians' artworks, encyclopedic tomes explain Palestinian artworks' meaning in terms of Palestinians' national narrative, yet treating art as the expression of an unquestionable existence. Such teleological text, very much in the Hegelian mode, right, overlook the artist's own quandary of always having to prove and never being able to assume or ignore their belonging. By merely negating that dictionary definition, by offering not art, and filling in the gaps of our appreciation for Palestinian, not Philistine art, they naturalize the split between art and society and require real art to be anti-agential, fundamentally aesthetic only, for art's sake. This is my take on historiography. So, second, while modern-day Palestinians may not be directly targeted with this mirror, so I constantly ask people, have you ever been called a Philistine? Have you heard it when you're in these galleries abroad? And many people say no, they haven't. They still trip on the imaginative political geography embedded in it when they try to enter the global gallery, as Rabah's dictionary demonstrates. To be an artist, the Palestinian, Filistini, must transcend the anti-art context of Palestine's bare life, this Agambian theme, wanting more with art. Yet to insist on the social role and ethnic particularity of art, he must accept to be entrenched in his Philistine status, not merely an artist from Palestine, say, an artist like any other, but just from a place that is perhaps like any other. So rather than solving the problem of the Philistine, I look with the intertwined histories of Europeans and Palestinians, and I see them as intertwined, and I thank Shahriar yesterday or 2 days ago for pointing out the relevance of this term right now, particularly in Germany. I look at this intertwining to see the problems of productivity and particularity. And I turn now to a work that I commissioned for the 2018 instantiation of the Jerusalem show, which I co-curated. So I'm taking on a work that I failed to curate properly, so that no one thinks I'm criticizing other people's work. So here we are, Philistinian, or maybe it's Philistinian, but it's a way of doing, a plot of moving, perhaps. Standing before the filmic projection of And Yet My Mask is Powerful by Basil Abbas and Rawan Abu Rahmeh, you visually enter a cool, damp, crusader-constructed stone vault. It was the Lutheran school in 2018 in Elotz. At first, your sight is caught by the polished marble floor, but then strange sounds turn your head towards the projection on the arched wall. You see a video with close-ups of lush fauna pressing around the camera as it moves into stone dwellings that seem to belong to the era of the vault. Your ears throb with music pounding at the rate of the rapidly spliced images on the screen splash with red subtitles in Arabic and English script. One image that returns shows a woman's hand pulling the fibrous moss from stones as it has been eating and rubbing, and then, pulling the fibrous moss from stones it has been eating and rubbing the grittiness of the moss between her thumb and forefinger. You may share the sensation of aridity, fragility, and tenacity. I want to suggest that this piece worked and failed Filistineum. Typing into their search engine, Palestinian masks, Abbas and Abu Rahme report finding Neolithic masks from the Israel National Museum's website, which had displayed them to prove 7,000 years of Israeli habitation. Continuous, right? After decoupling the masks from the website, they 3D printed them and distributed them to Palestinian youths undertaking trips to villages depopulated since the 1948 Zionist aggression. Eline, who wore one of the masks, described to me her finding spaces lush with flora she had never seen before, and inhaling a vitality she had not known, and exuding, she felt, a new energy. Removing visitors to these depopulated sites. Let's take the masks, you put them on, you visit a depopulated site. With the mask, you're no longer in a given identity. You're removed from that identity as you approach, right? The identities that would predestine your understanding of the space as either a lost territory because you're Filistini, or stolen property, or destroyed heritage, these things that you have to see when you go as a Filistini, get removed. The masks may extend their wearers' capacities, taking them, as Aline's testimony suggests, and the artist, into new territory, allowing for forbidden arrangements of energies, hopes, and subjectivities outside the geopolitically given coordinates. For the 2018 Jerusalem show, Jack Persekian and I hoped that exhibition visitors could wear the contemporary Neolithic mask and walk through the old city, escaping, if only temporarily, from the bifurcating identities that Israeli management of space imposes on all entrants. A closed-circuit camera hotbed, Jerusalem is among the most surveyed cities, as you know. Surveillance requires specific clothing practices as identity signals, which in Jerusalem prioritize one's patron. That is exactly what Abbas and Abu Rahme's hacked masks challenge. Still, like many Palestinian artworks I've heard of and partially encountered in my research, the Jerusalem show's version of "And Yet My Mask is Powerful" did not achieve full fruition. The masks, digitally printed in Texas, were shipped overnight by overnight mail to make the opening, but they did not arrive until months later. Israeli customs authorities had held on to them, like so many earlier works caught at borders. Once they finally arrived, we could not find anyone willing to wear them. A group of school children might have been interested. They belong to Mejlis al-Khayal, and they work with an artist based in Jerusalem, whose name I've sadly forgotten right now. But their parents categorically forbade them from this experiment. In our planning discussions, Abbas and Abu Rahme vaguely mentioned that we should get people from activist groups to volunteer, and I gradually realized that the couple does not know anyone very close in the Jerusalem area, like groups of peoples, because they cannot themselves enter there together and live there. So in closing, I want to suggest that their tentative, interactive, materially driven project hints at the condition by which one may work Filistinian, or Philistinian, if you might say it in English. If Mansour Salma constituted a kind of merging into solid space, the incompletedness of Philistinian art condenses the Philistinians' ability to transcend material circumstances. Inability, I'm saying. The artists, for all their political commitment, cannot assume there is a Palestinian people in the abstract sense. To respond to their work, even as they appeal for and contribute to that people, or some people, even as they are defined as such by Israeli mechanisms of control and counting. But perhaps we would better not think of this as an inability so much as the holding open of a gap in a truly local art history for a people yet to come, or for a people always being brought into being. Before encountering this art, I had not cared much for Gilles Deleuze. I hear a lot about him, wasn't that interested, I have to admit. But art done Philistinian recalls for me his provocative interpretation of art. Quote, "There is no work of art that does not call on a people who does not yet exist," end quote. Transversing the problem space of Philistinian art across internal and external borders, made, remade, and unmade, with audiences, leads me to wonder if the opportunity for art historians that we venture on with this volume is not to trace works back to given peoples, but to imagine with the works what not yet existent peoples they call on to become. Thank you. Independent curator and researcher. She obtained her MA in 2020 at my institution, my home institution of AUB, and that master's was in the history of art and curating. Yasmin will present on a long research project, and I'm very happy to invite her to speak.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kirsten. I'm very happy to be in touch with you again after a very long time. And I will have to speak in Arabic because my session is in Arabic, I'll have to switch. في البداية بحب أول شيء لي شرف كثير كبير إنه دكتور كيرستن هلأ اليوم معنا بالجلسة بعد شغل كتير طويل مع بعض، especially خاصة مع وقت حصولي لدرجة الماجستير من الجامعة الأمريكية في بيروت. في البداية بحب أتشكر المتحف على هاي الفرصة الغنية جدا، ولجميع الأفراد القائمين على هاي المنحة، وبالتحديد الأستاذة مرح على جهودها خلال هاي السنتين. بحكم للأسف بحكم شغلي أنا مضطرة إنه بعد البرزنتيشن مضطرة إني أترك، لكن رح نبقى على تواصل ورح أسمع باقي الجلسات وقت فراغي إن شاء الله. فأنا هلا حابة أعرض البرزنتيشن أو العرض التقديمي اللي بيخص مشروعي الأولاني اللي عملته لدرجة الماجستير، وبنفس الوقت المشروع اللي أنا هلا حاليا عم بشتغل عليه، علما على أنه هو مشروع بعده تحت بعض التغييرات وبعض التعديلات، فمضطرة أني أعطيكم نبذة عامة عن المشروع الأولاني عشان أقدر أكمل للمشروع الثاني. فبس دقايق عبال ما أعمل سكرين شايفين السكرين؟
نعم يا ياسمين.
أوكي. في البداية مشروعي كان عنوانه جمعية الفن، مجموعة الفنانين العرب، رسم خارطة نقدية للمشهد الفني في الأردن من خلال الأرشيف ما بين فترة 1970 ل 1980. هي النسخة الأولانية اللي هي كان بيشمل هو مشروع كان فيه البحث ومعرض. المعرض أقيم في عمان في عام 2020. هو كان زي ما أنا خبركم من متطلبات الجامعة على إنه نحصل على درجة الماجستير. في البداية أنا مشروعي هو عن مجموعة فنانين اللي نادراً ما كتب عنهم لسبب عدم وجود معلومات كافية. فإذا نطلع على العنوان هو رح ينقسم لثلاث أقسام. القسم الأول هي معلومات عن مجموعة الفن، مجموعة الفنانين العرب. الفترة الزمنية هي ما بين 1970 ل 1980. هي حقبة زمنية كانت مليئة بالأحداث السياسية والأحداث اللي مش بالضرورة أنها تكون في الأردن فقط، لكن بالدول المجاورة، اللي كمان كان لها تأثير كبير على خارطة الأردن، على سواء كان من ناحية النمو السكاني، من ناحية الثقافي، من ناحية الأمن السياسي لنقول. فكل التغييرات اللي كانت عم بتعيشها الأردن هي بسبب التغييرات اللي عم تجري بالوطن العربي بشكل عام. مجموعة الفن هن كانوا مجموعة مكونة من أعضاء أو من فنانين من مختلف أنحاء، من مختلف الجنسيات، من مختلف التخصصات. يعني ما كان في حدا له توجه معين أو اهتمام بالسياسة أو منتمي لحزب معين أو لمنظمة معينة. بالعكس، كانوا هن هدفهم انهم ياخذوا هاي كمنصه لهم للتعبير عن صراعاتهم الداخليه، صراعاتهم الوطنيه لنقول، خاصه انهم اغلبيتهم كانوا عم بيعيشوا فتره يعني نازحين، يعني لا هن بوطنهم ولا هن بوطن ممكن يقدروا يقولوا عنهم انه هذا وطنهم هن إلهم. فكان بدهم منصه انهم يعبروا عن هذا الجرح، عن رايهم، عن قضيتهم نقول ومسيرتهم الفنية. فهاي الصورتين اللي هلا أنا رح أعرضهم هن الصورتين الوحيدين اللي أنا قدرت ألاقيهم. للأسف هن مش مش للأعضاء الفنانين كاملة، لكن بهاي الصورة بنقدر نأكد على إنه هن في عضوين كانوا بالجمعية، اللي هو الأستاذ ياسر الدويك اللي هو واقف على يمين الصورة اللي بالنظارات، وعندنا الأستاذ رفيق اللحام الله يرحمه اللي توفى قبل سنتين، اللي هن كانوا من أعضاء الجمعية. وهاي الصورة الثانية اللي كمان بتشير على وجود بعض أعضاء اللجنة المجموعة، اللي هن الأستاذ ياسر دويك اللي على شمال الصورة، وبعدين عنا كرام النمري، الأستاذ كرام النمري، وعنا فؤاد ميمي اللي هو ما كان عضو أساسي بهاي الجمعية. أوكي، كان لحكم شغله في التلفزيون ولصناعة الأفلام اضطر إنه هو يكون فقط فنان بيمارس هواياته أو بيمارس فنه بعيداً عن إنه يكون منضم لمجموعة الفنانين. المعرض مثل ما أنا خبرتكم أقيم في عمان بسنة 2020، وبتكون من هو معرض أرشيفي كان غايته إنه يعطي أو يرسم خارطة نقدية للمشهد الفني. بيحكم علي إنه أرجع أعيد على إنه الأردن كانت بتمر زي ما خبرتكم بصراعات، بنزاعات وطنية أو إقليمية أو دولية بهذه الفترة بين السبعينات والثمانينات، اللي حكمت إنه يكون في تغييرات حتى بالمشهد الثقافي. إحنا ما بدنا نرجع نقول إنه بال 48 بال 67 بمعركة الكرامة، بالحرب الأيلول، بالحرب الأهلية كمان بلبنان بهاي الفترة بالسبعينات كمان كان لها دور تأثير كتير كبير بتغيير المشهد أو تغيير المشهد الثقافي والفني بهذيك الفترة. بهاي الفترة مع إنه كان في كثير أشياء عم بتصير من ناحية السياسة، كمان كان في تغييرات بالمشهد الفني، حتى لو كان على حساب إنه الواحد يكون عنده دافع، عنده شغف إنه يكون في مؤسسة فنية اللي هي تدعم الفنانين، سواء كانوا محليين أو إقليميين أو عالميين حتى. فإحنا بدي أشير يعني أعطي نبذة يعني سريعة جدا على بعض المؤسسات اللي كانت موجودة بهذيك الفترة، وهي كانت من جهد فردي نقول. مثلا عندنا دارة الفنون، عندنا كمان المتحف الوطني اللي كان بقيادة الأميرة وجدان علي، وعندنا كمان بهذيك الفترة اللي أعطت شيء جديد، جابت شيء جديد كمان معها من أوروبا، اللي هي الأميرة فخر النساء، اللي كمان أعطت فكرة اللي هي الآرت صالون، اللي هي ما كانت موجودة أصلاً بعمان. كان هدفها لفئة معينة جداً صغيرة، يعني تعلمهم يحكوا بمواضيع الفن وبمواضيع الثقافة. للحقيقة هي كانت جهد فردي لغايات يعني بسيطة جداً، إنه للحوار، لتبادل الآراء وفقط لا غير. يعني ما كان لها ما كانت حابة توسع هذا الشيء. المعرض مثل ما أنا خبرتكم كان أرشيفي بحث، كان بتضمن مجموعة من المستندات والوثائق الرسمية اللي إحنا بنقول مصدر أولي أو primary sources، اللي هي يا إما حصلت عليهم من الفنانين اللي كانوا موجودين بهذيك الفترة من جمعية الفن، مثل الأستاذ ياسر دويك وأستاذ كرام النمري، اللي هن لعبوا دور كتير مهم في المشروع تبعي. مثل ما انتم شايفين، هو جزء بسيط من المعرض اللي هو بتضمن جرايد، بتضمن مطبوعات، بتضمن مستندات ووثائق رسميه من سواء كان من المكتبه الوطنيه في الاردن، سواء من خطابات اللي كانت موجوده بالجمعيه. انا حابه انوه، بما انه كمان احنا عم نحكي عن الجمعيه، دور الجمعيه كانت هي اولا بنت على لنقول أو مجموعة فنانين عرب من مختلف الجنسيات، من مختلف التخصصات الفنية. تمام. وهذا المستند اللي قدامنا احنا الأولي لنظام الأساسي لمشروع جمعية الفن. أوكي. هذا أول بادرة على القوة اللي جمعت كل الفنانين على أنهم هن يختاروا هاي المنصة منصة لجميع الفنانين من جميع أنحاء الدول، جميع أنحاء التخصصات كمان. لأن الواحد يعمل جمعية معترف فيها قانونياً بالدولة، لازم يكون يتبعوا القانون الرسمي لهيئة الجمعيات في المملكة. فإحنا هون على يمين الورقة، على يمين السلايد بنشوف أول مسودة لهذا النظام، اللي هو بيشمل أسامي جميع المشاركين في هذه الجمعية، إيش أهدافهم وإيش طموحاتهم إنهم يعملوا بهاي الجمعية. كمان نشير هون إنه في مكتوب نقطة كتير مهمة وكتير لفتت نظري بهذا المشروع، إنه يجوز للفنانين العرب الذين يحملون جنسية من الدول العربية الانتساب للرابطة بصفة أعضاء موازنين، ولا يحق لهم الاشتراك بالانتخابات التصويتية للهيئة العامة. هلا احنا هون دخلنا كيف الوصلة اللي تجمع بين الجمعية والرابطة، بما انه هون عم بيحكوا عن الرابطة. هلا هن بلشوا بال 1970 على انها مجهود فردي أو مجهود من جماعة عبالهم إنهم يعملوا منصة تدعم هاي المواهب الفنية. أوكي. الجمعية عشان إنها تكون معترف فيها في الدولة لازم إنها تتحول لرابطة. فبالبداية بال 1970 كان في نشاطات ثقافية بسيطة جدا على قد ما هم بيقدروا يعملوا الجمعية. لتحويلها اضطروا انهم يغيروا اسمها من جمعية الفنانين العرب إلى رابطة التشكيليين في الأردن. أوكي. بعد نجاح هاي الرابطة تم تغيير اسمها إلى رابطة الفنانين التشكيليين الأردنية. تمام. وهون نقطة كاتبينها إنه يجوز على كل الفنانين من مختلف أنحاء الدول العربية إنهم يشاركوا، ولكن لا يحق لهم في تصويت على الانتخابات الهيئة العامة. راجعت أنا كمان مرة على القوانين، اتضح على إنه يجب على جميع الأفراد الهيئة أو المنظمة إنهم يكونوا من حاملين الجنسية الأردنية، ولكن أي حدا يكون من جنسية أخرى ما بحق لهم إنهم يصوتوا في الانتخابات الدورية اللي بتصير بالرابطة. هذا انتهى هون دوري بالمشروع الأول، على أني عرضت جميع الأرشيف اللي أنا قدرت أحصل عليه، سواء كان من الأستاذ ياسر دويك أو من الأستاذ كرام النمري. وبرجع بنوه على أنه هاي كلها المصادر اللي أنا قدرت أحصل عليها هي كانت مصادر أولية ومصادر من عندهم، يعني مش إنه حدا معطيهم إياه واقتنوهم هن وأخذوهم وحطوهم عندهم. فهدول بس عفوا أنا الصورة اللي شفناها هن لبعض أفراد الجمعية أو الرابطة اللي كان دورهم كتير فعال بهديك الفترة. لمشروع الثاني أنا لاحظت إنه كان في فجوة كتير كبيرة بالمشروع الأول، اللي هو دور اللغة، دور الترجمة، ودور الصور والنماذج المرئية. شو بعني بأنا بهذا الحكي؟ إنه كان في المستندات اللي حصلت عليهم الأولية، المصادر الأولية كانت كلها كتابات باللغة العربية، ونادراً ما أحصل على أي وثائق أو مستندات رسمية بتدل أو بتعكس على دور الجمعية أو الرابطة اللي هي لاحقاً اللي سميت فيها. باعتقادي الشخصي، لأنه ما في أي كتابات بتدل على أنه شو السبب فشل تطور الجمعية أو الرابطة لاحقاً إلى نقابة. تمام. كانت كل المصادر هي مكتوبة باللغة العربية، ولذلك أنا بعتبر أنه كدوري أنا كباحثة أنه مهم جداً أني أوثق كل هاي التغييرات أو كل هاي التطور من جمعية الفن لرابطة الفنانين التشكيليين العرب، للمحاولة على أنها تتطور هاي الرابطة على أنها تكون نقابة مسجلة ومعترف فيها في الدولة. أول دوكيومنت أنا حصلت عليها أو كتابات حصلت عليها هي من جريدة، للأسف ما عندي مصدرها، لكن بتقول إنه هي أفكار وطموحات لرابطة الفنانين التشكيليين. هاي الجمعية كان عندها آفاق وكان عندها بعد تفكيري كتير كبير على إنه يكون تتحول لرابطة الفنانين التشكيليين العرب، ولاحقاً لتكون إنها نقابة مسجلة ومعترف فيها. فهذا كان بادرة على إنه كيف بقدر أنا أحصل على معلومات إضافية تدعم فكرة المشروع الثاني اللي أنا هلأ حالياً عم بركز عليه، عن دور اللغة العربية وعن دور الترجمة وعن دور الصور والإيضاحات اللي بيستخدموها الفنانين، سواء كان بأعمالهم، سواء كان بالمستندات الرسمية فرضاً، أو سواء كان البوسترات أو النماذج اللي هن كانوا بيشتغلوا عليها. هون هلأ أنا بدي أعرض بعض النماذج اللي أنا كمان حصلت عليها اللي بتساعدني على كتابة الرسالة الثانية، اللي هي مطبوعات بسيطة للكاتب الأول، اللي أنا بناء على حكي الأستاذ كرام النمري على أنه ديب حماد هو الكاتب اللي كتب عن المشهد الفني، عن بعض الفنانين. وهذا الكتاب اللي هون عندنا للأستاذ مهند در الله يرحمه، وعندنا هون كمان الكتاب الثاني اللي هو عن فن التشكيل المعاصر. كتابات بسيطة جدا، ولكن كان في إيحاءات على أنها كان في بداية لأنه يكون يتطور هذا الشيء، إنه لا يكون في مطبوعات تانية ولا يكون في مشاركات تانية. هون عنا الشهادة اللي حصلت عليها من وزارة الثقافة، وبرضه اللي لقيتها من الرابطة، اللي هي بتتم تأكيد على أنه رابطة الفنانين التشكيليين الأردنيين نشأت عام 1977 بقيادة كانت بهذيك الفترة من أستاذ ياسر دويك، اللي قعد معهم لمدة 5 سنين تقريباً. كانت فترة جداً حيوية، كانت مفعمة بالنشاطات الثقافية، بالندوات، مش فقط للفنانين الأردنيين بهذه الفترة، لكن لجميع، كانت فعلياً منصة مفتوحة لجميع الفنانين العرب، لجميع الفنانين العالميين. كمان كان هناك في ندوات، في مناقشات لفنانين، لمؤرخين كمان، فكان في تبادل كتير قوي وكتير فعال بهذيك الفترة. وبنفس الوقت من أهم البيانات اللي ساعدتني على إني أكد إنه كان في جدا صراع ولنقول تحديات لأنها تتحول الرابطة إلى نقابة، لأنه بعد ما أنا اطلعت على قانون الجمعيات والهيئات الاجتماعية، لاحظت من أهم البنود الجمعية أنه لازم يكون تغيير مستمر لرئيس الرابطة. فرئيس الرابطة لازم يتغير على كل 2 سنين مرة. عشان يتحول الرابطة لنقابة بدها فترة من الزمن، وفترة من المتابعة، وفترة من الحوارات المستمرة. فلبين ما يوصلوا نقطة معينة بيضطروا إنه يرجعوا يعملوا إعادة انتخابات للرئيس، فبرجع كمان مرة بيرجعوا بيعيدوا هذه التقديم لأنه يتحول الرابطة لنقابة. وأنا على ما أعتقد على آخر مرة حكيت معهم بالرابطة تم إيقاف تحويل الرابطة إلى نقابة، يعني سعيهم لأنه يتحول الرابطة لنقابة بطل شيء وارد حاليا، لأنه لصعوبة المهمة، وغير هيك إنه المتابعة المستمرة المفروض إنه يصير فيها. ورئيس الرابطة لا يحق له أن يتم اختياره مجددا، لازم إنه يختاروا حدا تاني لا يكون رئيس رابطة. فلهذا السبب اضطروا إنهم يوقفوا فكرة تحويل الرابطة إلى نقابة، والتركيز على دور الرابطة في المشهد الفني والثقافي في الأردن. هون إحنا عنا على يمين العرض عنا رسالة كان كاتبها الفنان محمود طه الله يرحمه، اللي هو بيعطي فكرة عامة عن المشهد الفني بأوائل السبعينات. وأعرب الفنان بخطابه هذا اللي كان عباله كان ينزله بالجريدة، لكن للأسف صار يعني حسب قول الأستاذ ياسر دويك إنه كان متردد على إنه ينزل هذا الرأي أو هذا المقال في الجريدة، لعدم يعني كان بفضل إنه يتركه لبعدين، يعني مش لإنه ينزله على جريدة. الرسالة أنا اطلعت عليها وقرأتها، وفعليا تعطي إنه نظرة شمولية عن المشهد الفني في الأردن بهذيك الفترة. كان عم يعرب عن قلقه إنه ليش الوطن الباقي الدول العربية إنه ما عندها التحديات وهالصراعات، ولكن أعطى إنه لمحة كمان على جمعية الفن اللي هي كانت مؤلفة من مجموعة فنانين عرب، على سعيهم المستمر وعلى سعيهم إنهم يتخطوا كل هاي العقبات أو يتخطوا كل هاي التحديات، على إنهم يكونوا منصة فريدة من نوعها، فريدة من التعامل مع جميع لنقول المؤسسات الفنية سواء كان بالأردن أو خارج الأردن. والدليل على ذلك إنه كان في مشاركات عديدة في بناء القاهرة، في بناء الكويت، في برضه في بغداد، في مشاركتهم مع الاتحاد الاتحاد العام للفنانين العرب، التشكيليين العرب، حضروا ندوات عديدة، كان لهم دور ولو إنه بسيط، لكن كان في محاولات على إنهم يكونوا موجودين بالمشهد الفني خارج الأردن. أنا حصلت على مسودة للقانون نقابة الفنانين التشكيليين العرب، اللي هي برجع بأكد إنه على آخر حوار معي لرئيس الرابطة الحالي إنه مشروعهم لأنه تحويل الرابطة لنقابة صار يعني من المستحيل إنه يطلعوا عليها هلا حاليا أو يفكروا فيها حاليا، وبدهم يحاولوا يركزوا على إنها ترجع الرابطة مثل ما كانت بالسبعينات وبالثمانينات بالتحديد. أنا بهذه النقطة أو بهاي المسودة للقانون النقابة التشكيلية، رسالتي كانت أو البحث تبعي كان بيحاول يركز على أهمية اللغة، أهمية الترجمة، وأهمية استخدام الصور والنماذج المرئية. فأنا كل هدول الثلاث عناصر لعبوا دور كتير مهم سواء بالمشروع الأولاني أو سواء كان بالمشروع الثاني. المشروع الثاني أنا هون حالياً هلأ عم بدور على شو أهمية اللغة وكيف اللغة هي حتى لو كانت مصادرنا قليلة أو فريدة من نوعها، اللغة كمان بتساعد على إنه يكون في توجه للمشروع تبعي. وأنا فعلياً هلأ حالياً ولو إنه أنا قلت إنه المشروع الأول كان عبارة عن تجميع لهذه المصادر الوثائق والمستندات الرسمية، المشروع الثاني رح يحاول يركز أكثر على تغيير عنوان الجمعية من جمعية لرابطة الفنانين التشكيليين الأردنيين. هاي كلها عوامل بتساعد على إظهار دور الجمعية اللي هو كان منصة جدا بسيطة، إنه كيف هلأ هون دورها إنه هي عم تكون رابطة، ومحاولتهم البسيطة لأنها تكون نقابة، لكن هذا المشروع شبه مستحيل إنه يكون موجود لأنه لعدة عوامل مثل ما أنا حكيت مثل ما أنا خبرت. فأنا بنهي مشروعي على إنه يكون في أمل يوم من الأيام إنه الرابطة هاي تتحول لنقابة تخدم الفنانين سواء كانوا أردنيين أو من العرب، تعطيهم نشاط أو تعطيهم مساحة إنهم يكون لهم دور فعال بالمجتمع بالمشهد الفني كمان، سواء كان بالأردن أو بالوطن العربي أو العالمي. فأنا بحب أنهي بهذا السلايد وما بعرف إذا في
بشكرك كتير يا ياسمين، كتير بشكرك على المداخلة. We need to move now to our next presenter, and that is Clarissa. Okay, Clarissa Fonesca. Clarissa Danai Fonesca Azwara is a researcher specializing in Palestinian art. She has a PhD from the Universidad Autónoma de Madrid, and her research lines are Arab art, gender art, and nationalism. ياسمين يا ريت لو تقدري تبقي معنا، بس قلتي إنه ما بتقدري، مش هيك؟
Yes, and I have to apologize. مضطر إني أترك.
طيب أنا بحييكي كتير على اهتمامك باللغة. I think that is extremely important for the me trying to speak Arabic here, but for the whole tawajjuh, as you said, for the idea, the direction, orientation of a local art history. And we will collect the questions and send them to you. I think that's the best way to do it.
Thank you very much for your understanding. We'll be in touch again.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good luck. Bye-bye.
Is Clarissa ready to join us?
Hello.
Hello, Clarissa.
أطلبني؟
عم نسمعكي.
صباح الخير الجميع. أولاً أنا آسفة، أنا برسوم ولكن أنا كأجنبية في إسبانيا مع الحدود والسفر مني في أي مكان صعب. So I want to start, of course, apologizing because I could not be there with you, but hopefully in the future I will be able to be there. So first I want to thank the Palestinian Museum for the invitation and for encouraging me to do this research, which originated from a couple of lines in my doctoral dissertation and now has extended. Thanks also to Nariman Abdul Saud that helped me with translations from Arabic for my interviews. Thanks for the artist participation and to Leila Hotayt, who also facilitated me a lot of material for this research. And of course, thanks to all of you for listening and being here. I want to start this presentation by telling you a very short story. It was only a few seconds gap. A few seconds when the officers of the Ascalon prison did not focus on the prisoners, but in the people that was arriving to the visiting area. Mohammed asked his mother, be the first one to enter, and at the same time, he hurried up, be the first prisoner to arrive to the fence divided visitors and prisoners. The fence had small holes, and through one of them, Mohammed passed a small piece of fabric to his mother. She kept it under her dress and folded it like a small handkerchief and put it on her chest. It's a small piece of cloth, and that's the end of the story. This small piece of cloth was a work of art, Mohammed Ratawi. He did it in prison with a pillowcase and some crayons. Using these methods, hundreds of drawings were smuggled out of Ascalon prison in 1970 and 1985. Palestinian political prisoners in Ascalon had the skills that were developed by the artists using their imagination and their artistic knowledge to subvert the dynamics of the prison system. So my research is dedicated to some of the works of art used in Ascalon. I'm gonna share my screen now. I don't know if you can see my screen. You can see my screen?
It'll come. I think if we give it a minute.
Oh, okay.
Yep, there it is.
Very good. Full screen, right?
Yes, please.
Oh. Very good. Now.
Or maybe you can select the icon at the far right before the size, which would put it into presentation mode.
It says that my screen share is off.
It's on. We're seeing it. If this is it, let's just go with this.
Sorry. I don't know. Sorry, is this technology? Okay. Sorry, I'm wasting time. I'm going to do it again. Okay. We'll try to work it out. Okay, so his research is dedicated to some of the works of art that were produced in Ascalon. The artworks are unique and provide a visual record of the life within prison, reflecting the realities of everyday life in incarceration, as well as the powerful symbols of Palestine. Okay. So the first art I want to talk about is the art of disrupting prison dynamics. As Ascalon, also known as Ashkelon Prison and currently known as the Shikma Prison, is a building that was constructed in the British Mandate and was originally used as a headquarters for the British Army and as a royal palace to host British delegations. It became a prison in 1970 when the number of Palestinian political detainees dramatically increased, especially after 1967. The artists that were in Ascalon between 1970 and 1985, according to what I've been able to research, are Mohammed Ratawi, Sufdi Al-Adawi, Mahmoud Afana, Mohammed Abu Baresh, and Ali Al-Najjar. Most of these artists were very young and did not have a lot of experience before being incarcerated. And some of them started drawing when they were in prison. Ascalon artists were not in themselves established group. They did create a solidarity network within the prison by cooperating with other inmates from the prison to hide the drawings, to get the materials, and to smuggle art out. Palestinian prisoners in Ascalon lived in terrible conditions. Orphanage was a common practice. Sufdi Al-Adawi, Palestinian prisoner and artist in Ascalon, illustrated his experience in solitary confinement in his works of art. One of his artworks, the one that we are seeing now on the screen, hopefully, he did a self-portrait in a solitary isolation cell. The artist portrayed the feeling of oppression by drawing himself into a small space, almost in a fetal position, with the bar shadows reflected his own figure. While being punished and tortured, he focused on his creativity in order to free his mind of incarceration. As he stated, and I quote, "My imagination used to take me outside the prison, as if I was living outside. I imagined the sea, I walk on the seashore, I walk among the people, all of this in my imagination. And all this let me rest a lot. So all the things imagined were very useful for my drawings." End of quote. He mastered the art of subversion in prison by creating coping strategies through his imagination. His works of art became spaces where he reconnected with freedom, reflecting all of the images he was not able to see within the prison. He had the feeling of liberty, then thought he was completely isolated. The harsh conditions of prisoners in Ascalon are depicted in Leila Hotait's movie, Trials of Ascalon. This fictionalized documentary, inmates appear walking in circles into a small courtyard, sleeping on the floor in a small room, and being punished by the jailers. The film was based on interviews conducted with Sufdi Al-Adawi. The movie was filmed in an abandoned school in Lebanon, which according to the director was an accurate image of Israeli prisons that were built in occupied Palestine, because they were mostly buildings repurposed as prisons. The Ascalon prison has a long history of politics, resistance, and organized strikes as well. Ascalon was one of the first and main sites where prisoners created what the researcher Norman calls counter-order of parallel institutions within prison, meaning that prisoners organized themselves and created an alternative education, administration, financial, and communication system. In this counter-order system, art had an important place. Ascalon artists participated in a wall newspaper that contained news about the political situation until it was confiscated by the guards. Afterwards, prisoners changed the wall mural for a notebook, which also contained articles and was illustrated with small drawings done with ink from a regular pen. Wobbly states that prisons are designed to rob inmates of agency. Actually, in the case of Ascalon, the interaction between inmates inside the institution and their interpersonal contact created a culture of counter-discipline among the prisoners. So Ascalon artists created agency by interacting and organizing apart from the prison system. They had a purpose, and everyday activities challenged the dynamics of the authorities in Ascalon. Of course, the officers tried to break the inmates' organization. did searches in the overcrowded cells. They went into the rooms while empty to verify if the prisoners were hiding something. But the counter order established in Azkaban spread rapidly among other prisons, mainly because of the authorities themselves, because they tried to deter resistance by transferring leaders to different prisons in Palestine. They were in fact the key to the organization, because the inmates that were transferred replicated the Azkaban system in other prisons in occupied Palestine. Now, the second art that I want to talk about is the art of actually smuggling out the works of art from prison. As I said, the art of subversion consists not only in creating the works of art, as a complicated process. From getting the fabric, smuggling the crayons in, hiding the drawings in the cells, and afterwards in the clothes, in the visiting days, and also they needed the participation of the family members that came to visit. The drawings were made in fabric, initially in handkerchiefs, and then in pillowcases. One of the reasons for choosing fabric to do the drawings was that this material was easier to smuggle than paper, because it did not make any noise. So when the prisoners were searched by the jailers, they would not get caught. Another reason to choose fabric was that the color would not show underneath the prisoners' clothes. Initially, works of art were done with inks from pen and handkerchiefs that were bought in the prison commissary or canteen that was open in the prison once a month. Another way to get pens was from the examiners that came to apply tests, the inmates that were able to study. The pens did not last very long. According to the artist, 4 pens were needed to finish one drawing. The ink was extracted from the pen with a clip mixed to get different colors. Crayons came afterwards. The artist got them by 2 different means. A small part of the crayons were obtained from construction workers. They used to mark where they had to work and then leave them behind. The Adawi recalls that he and other prisoners talked to their families and asked them to bring small colored crayons and pencils so they could pass them through the fence. The problem was the size of the holes. Barely a finger could go through, so they could only get small pieces. Also, visitors had to hide the colors under their clothes, but after the Israeli jailers start searching visitors extensively, they start hiding up to 5 or 6 small colors into their mouths. A 3-minute animated film from 2010, which is what you are seeing now on the screen, illustrates the smuggling out of Azkaban artworks, the passing of crayons, and the small pieces of fabric through the bodies and the fence, and it is dramatized with the voice of Subi al-Adawi in the background. Smuggling out of the drawings took place in the visiting day. There were speakers in the prison that called the names of the inmates that had to go to the visiting space. Speakers didn't work properly. It was very difficult to hear. The prisoners tried to really focus to hear out their names. Once they were called, they had an hour to prepare themselves and go to the visiting area. Al-Adawi remembers that he carried the drawings under his sleeves, so when he put his hand on the fence, on the extreme of the fabric stick out of his sleeve, and his relatives took it out and put them under their own clothes. They had to be very careful because officers were very aware of exchanges during visits, since prisoners usually smuggle messages to coordinate strikes, and they hide them in their bodies or in their mouths. In each visit, at least 4 drawings per prisoner were smuggled out, 2 in each slip. Artists were helped by other prisoners to smuggle out the paintings, like involved in the Palestinian political movement. The works of art made by prisoners of Azkaban were valued, and they were made public by the Political Prisoner Committee of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. In 1984, the committee published a small booklet reproducing a collection of works by prisoners in Israeli jails, as the organization considered political prisoners as a pillar of the struggle for the liberation of Palestine. The booklet is titled Palestinian Art Behind the Bars. The publication, in addition to presenting the artwork, there are testimonies of the methods of torture and the appalling living conditions to which Palestinian prisoners were subject in Israeli jails. The exhibits of Ashkelon artists pushed the boundaries of censorship in prison and contributed to the emergence of a culture of resistance that gave Palestinian prisoners an even more important role. Mohammed Rakawi disclosed that he knew that his work was recognized and contributing to resistance. I quote Mohammed, "I knew the message people will receive is that while in prison, I am doing something, and we are still resisting in this way." The same sense, Subdi al-Adawi recalls the works of art from his time in prison as very special. I quote, "I still see these drawings as the most precious ones. They are sincere, although they look as if done by a child. I didn't have experience with color yet. These drawings have their own kind of truth. In all of them, there is the homeland, the feelings that are the source of the ethnic." Therefore, artists had the intention to draw as a form of participating in resistance. Resistance understood as a diagnostic of power, allowing us to understand broader dynamics of oppression and control, implying that Ashkelon artists challenged the power dynamics of prison and occupation and resisted back through their artworks. In addition to birds, stars, and the Palestinian flag, Ashkelon artists used powerful symbols, such as the olive tree, map of Palestine, kufiya patterns, and representation of the Palestinian nation embodied as a woman, as well as the colors of the flag. The artworks also contain representations of Israeli oppression with visual metaphors such as barbed wire, prison bars, and military boots. The former characteristic is unique to these artworks because actually the artists that were living under occupation did not use these kind of symbols because they were constantly harassed by the Israeli army. So the works of art that were created in Ashkelon contained these kind of symbols because they were already clandestine. All the symbolism, the works of art, was very powerful for the Palestinian resistance movement, especially because it was drawn in prisons and the drawings were easily transformed into posters. This is an example of the use of Ashkelon art to create a poster that called to solidarity with the liberation of Palestine and with political prisoners. It was published in 1984. Drawing depicts a closed fist holding barbed wire, symbolizing that the power is in the hands of the Palestinians. The hand is covered with a kufiya sleeve and the veins are opened in the form of a map of Palestine to represent the pain of occupation that is shown with the handcuffs. Works of art also depict the prison that has the form of the Star of David, meaning Israel, and the brick walls of the prison. It is possible to see small cracks that are made by olive trees' roots sprouting from the floor, which signify hope and resilience. Now, just to finish, a short epilogue, Ashkelon artists were liberated on May 21, 1985, with the Jibril Agreement in an exchange of prisoners for Israeli soldiers. However, Rakawi and Al-Adawi were not able to go back to Palestine and stayed in Syria as refugees. As for the other artists, no further information is found. More than 100 drawings were smuggled out, according to Al-Adawi. Many of them were confiscated, destroyed, and some of them were lost. A small part of the drawings was recovered by artists themselves after they were out of prison. Farhad Museum, private collection in Lebanon, has gathered 30 original works of art from Ashkelon artists. As for the artists themselves, the last information we have about from Sugdi is from 2015 when we did a poster. And Mohammed Rakawi is still working as an artist, but creating different artworks from the ones he made in prison. He says that he was really haunted by his time in prison and that even after 20 years of getting out, he still has nightmares where the officers follow him and put him in prison again. No longer needing the use of his art as a cope mechanism, he asserts, and I quote, "Why to be limited when I have the freedom to do whatever I want? I am no longer a prisoner, so why didn't my thoughts or way of thinking should be?" Just to finish, a few conclusions. Pascal, an artist, life experience, evidence, a story of resistance in prisons, as well as self-expression as a form of survival. Artists developed the art of subversion with coping strategies that challenged the prison authority and created spaces of freedom even in confinement. The artworks operated as a form of resistance that prisoners undertook to subvert the prison dynamics and the prison system oppression. Artists transformed their imagination and memories into drawings, creating works of art as a way of communication, solidarity, unity, and resistance despite the risk of punishment. The process of smuggling out the drawings and how art created behind bars subverted the dynamic of imprisonment, also by creating a connection with the outdoors. By showing life within bars and taking those images to the outside, prisoners show the oppression they were subjected, as well as the torture they were having, but in a resilient way, showing also hope and resistance toward the occupation. And finally, I would just like to add that the 1970s and 1980s saw a boom in the Palestinian art forms that were linked to resistance and revolution, such as Ghassan Kanafani's literature, Mahmoud Darwish poems, and Slimane Mansour's paintings. Palestinian artists are part of this trend, and they are important because the way the art was produced and presented was in itself a form of subversion and revolution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clarissa. We move now to our third and final panelist for this morning section, and we'll be listening to Khayla Juma. She is a Palestinian visual artist and researcher undertaking a master's degree in modern visual arts from Al-Tanbaj University in Istanbul.
صباح الخير مرحبا جميعا. بتمنى تكونوا بخير يعطيكم ألف عافية. زي ما قالت الدكتور بحثي تحت عنوان سيميائية السلاح في الفن التشكيلي الفلسطيني. بس خلينا نبلش تعرض هاي الورقة البحثية بشكل مباشر للإشارات والعلامات اللي عبرت عن السلاح في الفن التشكيلي الفلسطيني المعاصر. ظهرت يعني عدد من الأسلحة المختلفة الثقيلة الخفيفة، عندنا البنادق، الذخائر، القنابل اليدوية والألغام، الطائرات الجوية، الدبابات، في كمان السلاح الأبيض اللي هو السيوف، الرماح والسكاكين، في كمان الدروع والخوذ، المقاليع والحجارة. طبعا الحجارة لها خصوصية في الوعي الفلسطيني وغيرها كمان من الأسلحة. قسمت هذا البحث ل5 فصول رئيسية. الفصل الأول بيحكي عن المنهجية، بقاعد لهذه الورقة البحثية من حيث المادة النظرية. تمام هيك منيح. فالبحث الأول بيفرض أو بيطرح الفرضية وبيطرح عدد من التساؤلات عن هذا البحث. عدد من التساؤلات اللي هي بتدور حول السلاح في الفن التشكيلي. مثلا عندنا كيف تجلت الرموز اللي بتعبر عن السلاح بين المقاومة الفلسطينية، يعني السلاح الفلسطيني، وبين السلاح اللي بأيدي الإسرائيليين. كمان عندنا إيش كانت رمزية الألوان، إيش كانت رمزية المكان، الزمان، الأشخاص. كمان كيف تجلت هاي الرموز في الفن التشكيلي، في الكاريكاتير، وفي كمان فن الملصقات. الفصل الثاني بيحكي عن الأسلحة الخفيفة، زي ما قلنا في عندنا البنادق، الرشاشات، في كمان القنابل اليدوية. الفصل الثالث بيحكي عن السلاح الثقيل اللي هو الدبابات، الطائرات، الصواريخ. الفصل الرابع بيحكي عن الأسلحة البيضاء كما قلنا، السكاكين، السيوف. والفصل الأخير بيحكي عن الحجارة والمقاليع. هون الورقة هاي بتقارب أو بتعمل مقارنة بين والتحالف كمان دول الخليج. هي يعني ليست صواريخ ولكن تأخذ منحى الصاروخ، تنزل من السماء بصورة عمودية. تحية لقناصة الطائرات. الدبابات كمان من الصور التي لا تفارق الوعي الفلسطيني، اللي هو الطفل فارس عودة اللي هو وقف أمام دبابة يعني أضعاف حجمه وكان بيحمل حجر. كثير من الفنانين صوروا هذه الصورة. وهون عندنا فنانة عملت الحجر كبرت الحجر، لأنه فعلا يعني هو شهيد وطفل صغير، ولكن بمفعول حجر صغير وقف بجرأة أمام الدبابة. هون عبد الرحمن المزين حوار باللون الأسود، كمان بيظهر عنده سيميائية أو رموز الدبابات. السلاح الأبيض، رح أحكي شوي عن السلاح الأبيض وأختم لأنه ما أظن ضل لي كثير وقت. بالنسبة لموضوع السلاح الأبيض، استخدم الفنانين الفلسطينيين السلاح الأبيض كنوع من أنواع التغني في الماضي، أو نوع من أنواع مواساة النفس. يعني الفنان بيطبطب على حاله إنه بالماضي إحنا كان عندنا نصر، كان عندنا يعني حروب وكنا نفوز بهاي الحروب. فمثلا بيعطيك بعض الشخصيات التاريخية زي مثلا صلاح الدين الأيوبي اللي هو بيرتدي زي الفارس من خنجر، سيف، درع إلى ما لا ذلك. كمان دخول صلاح الدين الأيوبي إلى القدس، هون بيظهر عندنا كثير عدد من الأسلحة زي الدروع، الرماح، السيوف. تحرك. إسماعيل شموط كمان بيستخدم عنا الرمح. بطلت تتحرك. تمام مش مشكلة. خليني أختم بس بمقولة عندي. بيقول ألبرت أينشتاين: أنا لا أعرف السلاح الذي سيستخدمه الإنسان في الحرب العالمية الثالثة، ولكني أعرف أنه سيستخدم العصا والحجر في الحرب العالمية الرابعة، لأنه مش راح يكون ضل إشي بعد ما الحرب العالمية الثالثة راح تكون دمرت كل العالم. وهذا هو. شكرا، يعطيكم العافية.
We are honored to have as our commentator May Sayrafi, who is the director of the Contemporary Visual Art program here at the Faculty of Art, Music and Design at Birzeit. And she received her PhD from the University of Westminster within, actually, I don't know what the topic was, but the MA was... Okay, all right. So May, please give your comments, and then we'll take questions from the audience too.
First of all, thank you for having me today. Reading these papers was very inspirational. I will be commenting in English, basically because most of the papers that I read were in English, so I thought it would be easier to draw connections if I talk about them in English a little bit. but I just wanted to talk a little bit about my background. I'm an architect, but I also teach art history here at BZU, and also I used to teach at the International Art Academy Palestine. But what really resonated with me after I was reading these papers is how much they were really connected with my recent research, which talks about the concept of agency and how we look at these small individual acts of ordinary Palestinian people, and how can these small acts have this impact within a wider context. And so I just want to kind of talk a little bit about each paper and kind of connect it with that theme, and then move further and start thinking about the role of a Palestinian artist in the bigger movement of resistance. So I thought it was very interesting, Clarissa's work, where we look at different forms of agency. We see this individual agency of a prisoner who's creating space for art. And this idea, this notion of being able to create this art where he reveals his imagination, his aspirations, he's trying to access places he can't reach, he was able to undermine the oppressor, and he was able to subvert this dynamic of prison itself. And it doesn't stop here. In her work we see more forms of agency, such as the collective agency, where this art actually extends beyond the prison walls. And we have the families and the people who visit the prisoners actually collaborating and trying to get this artwork outside the prison walls. And it's interesting because when you look at it, it's the way they use, it becomes very creative, the way they use their bodies, the way they hide hands, they start being creative with the medium itself to kind of think about ways to break the boundaries, to break this confinement, this imprisonment. And that moves me to Khalat's work, which also shows another form of agency, the agency of the artist himself, who really took this big part. And he's looking at these, whether it's in the posters or in the works we've seen from Ismail Shamout and from Tamam as well, where they were really sending clear messages to Palestinians at this time to be part of this larger political discourse that we are calling for armed struggle. So we see a lot of images and symbolisms of weapons. And this really highlights what an important role the Palestinian artists had back then. And poster was a very important medium, which actually was a way to kind of get it across to a wider audience, not just inside Palestine, but also internationally, because they wanted international awareness about the Palestinian cause, they wanted global solidarity with the Palestinians as well. So, and from this, I'm going to connect to Yasmin, because here we're looking at a group of Palestinians in Jordan who are trying to form this collective body that's going to become a platform for them to also support the Palestinian cause. And again, they had to face their own restrictions, their own regulations that deprived them of forming an association. But they also found a way. They found a way to connect with other artists from the region and hold exhibitions and get some of these works into the posters as well, so that the Palestinian voice would be heard. So it's really interesting when you think about agency. It starts with an individual effort, but agency, it's the ability to make change. But what gives us this transformative power is that when it becomes collective. And this is where it really becomes interesting to see how these different practices carried out by artists, how are they able to actually extend beyond these different spaces, whether we're talking about a jail, whether we're talking about Palestinians living under siege, or Palestinians living in exile. How can we create this continuity? How can these interactions and collaborations come together to actually get this voice heard on a wider level? So I thought that was interesting to kind of draw that connection between these three works. And another important element that kept coming up when I was looking at these papers is the idea of space, and the space where the art was being created and executed. And here we question if it is the lack of space, actually, to be more precise. And how did that drive very creative means for Palestinians to actually find ways around it, and that actually became a driving force for Palestinians to think about new mediums, to think about new techniques for art. And this is where posters really kept becoming something very, very dominant in the Palestinian art, and also spaces, because even when because Yasmin talked about the Palestinian, the association inside Jordan, but similarly in Palestine, there was also the Palestinian, the Artists League. They also had problems in holding exhibitions, and they used public schools, city halls, to actually get the public to see their work. So space is an interesting element, and it actually can be an inspirational element to actually think, how can that space influence the outcome of the art? And I think it would have been interesting to see more in these papers, this kind of connection, where we're not just looking at special, like certain specific experiences, but actually if we can connect these experiences with other spaces, with other regions, and see how they actually work together. Because you can draw a lot of similarities between them and see how a lot of these tactics that are being implemented by Palestinians in jail, in exile, and even the artists living inside Palestine, they do resonate with one another. I want to end it just by saying that it is important to think that the relationship between the artist and the medium is not fixed. The artist and the space is not fixed. It changes. It's a very dynamic relationship that changes because of existing political forces that are actually always implementing the Palestinian context. So I think this is something worth kind of reflecting on and thinking how, whenever we actually analyze the outcome of an artist, we really need to understand this process and the dynamism that is being involved in this process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, May. We have one question via Facebook, maybe actually more, because I just saw another one come in. One for Vera and one for Yasmin and one for Clarissa, both from Vera Tamari. Before I ask them, Khayla, would you like to respond to any of the points that May raised? You're good? Okay. Clarissa, if you're there, would you like to say anything about the remarks you heard from May?
If you want, maybe at the end, I can do like a common answer. Thank you.
Okay, so I have two questions that Vera Tamari has sent in. The first is for Yasmin, who is not here, but I sent it to her by email. And I think we got a little bit of a hint towards it with May's comments. So, while the art movement in Jordan was taking momentum in the early 70s, the same energetic art movement environment was being created in occupied Palestine. So what connection did these two geographic and national proximities have in their vision and practices, especially that many key figures of the artists in Jordan were Palestinian? Yasmin isn't here to answer, and I myself don't have an answer. I think May hinted at something, and I know there's been important art work about the two sides of the Jordan River. Beyond that, I think, unless anyone else wants to take it, Rakawi saying that he knows his work is recognized. How can he get that sense back? How does that come back to him? How does this become a dialogical space rather than two separate spaces just imagining each other, but separately? And I noticed in your reading of the work, and a little bit also in Khayla's, there can be a kind of sense of an inventory. Like you verbalize the work, and it, you know, we see the hands grabbing the olive rings, and then we see the woman, you know, but how is the art more than just these lists of symbols put together on a 2D surface? So I guess that actually goes also to you, Khayla. I was very interested to notice that the picture that you concluded with Mansour's Uzis, right? it reminded me of the famous photograph from Picasso in Palestine, with the Palestinians standing in that position too. And I'm interested in all of these about the way the artists and you as historians and writers and audiences try to keep out, if that happens, the Philistine and insist on it being real art and being professional and being mishmujeret siyasi or something. So, okay. Clarissa, could you please start by answering or giving us your thoughts?
Thank you. So first of all, I want to thank May for the comments and the reading that she did on my paper. Was actually agency was one of the ones that was interested most when I was doing this research. And it was actually not what I was initially looking for. I was trying to retrieve works of art and to see where they go and how they were received, but it was a little bit more difficult, but I found a lot of information from to one of the artists themselves. Like he gave me, when I was hearing him, all the clues about how agency was created in this space. So thanks for the reading. As for the question from Vera Tamari, first of all, I am very honored to read her, because actually when I started doing research about Palestinian art, like 9 years ago when I was doing my master, it was one of her papers that actually encouraged me and interested me a lot about Palestinian art. So I am very honored to read her. And to answer her question, I haven't compared the works of art of Palestinian artists living in occupied Palestine and artists that were inside the prisons. What I did notice from doing the work, that I mentioned in my presentation, is that Palestinian artists that were in occupied territories, they had a lot of trouble. Their artworks were confiscated, so they did not. They tried to use different symbols. In the works of art of the artists from Ascalon, they even put the Star of David, a lot of symbols, because they were already clandestine works of art. So they took it out with this kind of symbols. But it will be very interesting to do another paper about how the depiction of prisoners was made in the prison and outside of it. So I will take this idea forward. And about the third question, also thank you very much. The artist, the connection with the outdoors, obviously was only possible through these small spaces during the visits of the family members. And but the artists, they were not afraid. That's what I was saying, that they were part of the resistance and they knew. Although I don't know if you noticed, but all the works of art are signed, and they signed the works of art with their own names. So even if afterwards, when their works were out, it was known and there will be consequences. They were not afraid to do it, so they were out of it and they created this connection. And also, before the works of art were out, they also had consequences, because as one of the artists told me, like they use the pillowcases. And if you lose a pillowcase, then you will be punished, because where did that pillowcase went? So even before the works of art were out of the prison, they always faced backlash and consequences inside the prison, but they were aware of it and they didn't care. This was their form of contributing to resistance. I don't know if that actually answers the question, but I would be happy to have any comments. And I want to also, now that I can word now, I want to thank all of you, because I am very happy to be in a space where the works are very interesting and to hear the background. Thank you very much.
That's great,
It's difficult.
Clarissa. And now Hera.
بالنسبة للتعامل مع اللوحة نصيا، يعني إنه أمسك لوحة وأتعامل معها كنص، أو التعامل مع النص لوحيا، يعني مثلا أقرأ نص وبعدها أعمل منه لوحة، هو بالضرورة مش قائم على سرد علامات. يعني أنا بقول والله أوكي هون في بارودة، هون في جنبها ما بعرف حمامة سلام، هون في موضوع قائم على علاقة السيميائية، اللي هو هل في علاقة تكاملية بين هاي الأجزاء، أو هل في علاقة ضدية بين هاي الأجزاء، أو هل في علاقة سيادة بين جزء من هاي الأجزاء. فحتى فكرة إنه يعني علامة وحدة قائمة بذاتها، يعني أنا لو جبت ورقة بيضاء ووضعت عليها فقط بارودة، أو جبت ورقة بيضاء وكتبت عليها كلمة واحدة، هاي الكلمة في سياقها أو في هذا المكان إذا كانت وحيدة ما إلها معنى، ولكن إذا وضعتها في سياق معين بالضرورة رح يصير إلها معنى. العلاقة التكاملية بين الأجزاء، العلاقة التكاملية بين السيميائيات جميعا في لوحة واحدة هي اللي بتعطي هذا الروح أو هذا التحليل لهذه اللوحة. شكرا.
Now we have oh yes, thank you, audience, live audience. Okay.